So in the previous video, we started with an introduction to lists, and we went through various scenarios to sort of see how we could manipulate some basic lists, and indeed actually talked about what lists were. So as it turned out, we went through 3 ways to create a list. The first was enclosing the item in square brackets, by concatenating existing lists, adding 2 together, and also by using a function that returns a list, which I used in this example, sorted. But we can also use the list type constructor, which is like list in brackets with brackets. And constructors will actually make more sense when we've introduced classes, which will be in a later section of this course. But for now, just think of the list constructor as just another function that you can actually call. So if you use lists with no parameters, it just creates an empty list. So I'm going to delete this code, and we're going to start with a clear slate here. Like so. So using a list with, as I said, with no parameters, it just creates an empty list. So we could type, and that ends up being exactly the same as the first option here. So I've got list underscore 1 equals square brackets, which is an empty list, but I can also do this, list underscore 2 equals list with brackets. And in both cases, what they do is they create an empty list. So basically they're both identical, as you can see. And just to confirm that, we can actually print this out. I can type print list1 dot format list underscore 1 and print list2 dot format list underscore 2. And I can put if list underscore 1 is equal to list underscore 2, print the lists are equal. So actually run this. We can see that both are empty lists. List 1 and list 2 are both empty, as you can see there. And we get confirmation by doing the comparison, the double equals signs to compare them, and they're both considered equal by Python. Now, I don't think we've actually mentioned this before, but the actual, when you call a function such as print or sorted, so function in this example being print, you can see this stuff in the middle here, they're actually called parameters or arguments. So the parameter in our last print function call was the string the lists are equal, so this is actually a parameter. That's a parameter that we're passing to the function called print. Now later in the course, we'll start actually creating our own functions, and we'll actually cover parameters and arguments then in more detail. But strictly speaking, the lists are not equal is an argument, but the 2 terms, argument and parameters, are often used interchangeably. So the list constructor, and again the constructor is using the list with the brackets, can be called with no parameters as we've done. We can also call it with a single iterable parameter. So in Python, an iterable is just an object that is capable of returning its members one at a time. So all the sequence types built into Python are actually iterable, and we can actually pass a string to the list. So we can do something like this. Print list, the lists are equal. Like so, we can run that. And you can see what's happened there is automatically Python has actually created a list from what we've sent to it, 1 character at a time. So each item, each letter of the string has been added individually as a separate option in that actual list. And that's what the constructor is actually doing. It's actually doing that for us when we're calling this list function. So it's creating a list whose members are each of the characters in the string that we passed to a list. And this was the lists are equal was what we actually passed to it. So it can actually be very useful to do that if you want to assign a list to another variable and have them then reference different lists. So on a normal assignment works as in other languages and can actually confuse newcomers to programmers, as I'm going to show you in the following example. So I'm going to type in some code here, comment this out. We can put even equals 2, 4, 6, 8. And we type another even equals even. And then we can type another even dot sort reverse equals true. Note the capital T for true. We can do print even. So if we actually run this, you can see what's actually happened there. We're printing out even though we're actually updating another variable. So we created another underscore even variable and assigned it to even. Then we actually updated the values of even using sort, and we actually used the reverse equal true parameter to actually return the results sort of last to first instead of first to last. But the important thing here was that even though we haven't actually updated even directly, we've used another variable called even. Because we've updated that variable, it actually updated the variable even as well. So in other words, both variables even and another even refer actually to the exact same list, so that And that's why when we used to sort, both lists were actually sorted, as you can see, because we're actually printing out the first list, which we didn't actually directly use the dot sort on. And just to confirm that, what we can actually do, after the assignment, we can confirm that they're the same by typing print another underscore even is even. And that should actually return true. So if we actually run that, it actually returns true, which actually says from Python's perspective, these two are the same thing. They're actually pointing to the same list. But if we actually create a new list for the another even variable and pass in the parameter of even, we can get that not to be the case. So we can actually type list here, the function list or the constructor list, and we're passing even, the current list, to that, and list is going to return, in fact, a new list. So when we do this print down here, we should find that that comes up and says false, but we still will end up getting the same results because we're still ultimately sending the same information. So if we actually run this, you can see that's now false, and that's because they're no longer the same list. We had a list that was created for even, and then we used the list constructor passing the even list, and the list constructor actually returns us a new list. So consequently, there's two separate lists now. The even variable's got its own list, and the other underscore even variable has also got its own list as well. Just to confirm, we can actually do another test there. We can print another, instead of putting is, we can put equals equals and actually run that. And that's going to tell us, say at this point now it's true, because that's saying whether they're equal, whether the contents are equal, not whether they're actually pointing to different variables in memory, if that makes sense, in different lists essentially. So it's important to know the difference there between the double equals. So we're actually comparing to see whether what's in the lists are the same as opposed to is. We're saying, is this the same list that's actually in memory somewhere? So that's going to return false because it's separate now. And again, equals, is the contents of the lists the same? That's going to return true. Now, if you really wanted a new version of then, the first variable, we could have actually done something like this, where instead of putting list, we could have actually done something like sorted, even, reverse equals true, true. We could run that, and that's now false because we've sorted it into a different order. So sorted does return a new list, but now it's sorting it in a different order. And just to confirm, if I set that to be is and run it, it's still set to false because they're actually pointing to different lists still. And setting that to equals, we correctly get false as well. And that's because the sorted function returned a separate list. So moving on. So earlier we concatenated or appended our even and odd lists. That's actually in a previous video. And we actually produced a new list called numbers that included all the items from both lists. I'm going to put some more code on the screen and see if you can actually guess what this will do. So I'm going to comment that out and leave the even in there. And I'm going to put in odd equals 1, 3, 5, 7, 9. And this is from the previous video when we're dealing with adding these things together. What do you think is going to happen if I type numbers equals even odd, and they'll print it out? So can you guess what that's going to actually produce? Let's run it and see. Now it actually returns a list containing two lists. So you can see sort of lists within a list. That's the list number 1, which is basically based on the contents of even, and the second one is based on the contents of odd, and they were both appended into one master list. And just to confirm that, instead of actually printing that out, let's actually change that and actually add some code here and put a for loop. So for numbers set in numbers, print number set, and actually should have been number set just to be technically correct, like so. And then we'll put for, noting the indent level, for value in number underscore set, print value. So in the outer loop, number underscore set iterates through the members of numbers. So it's assigned each of the two lists in turn. And within the inner loop itself, the value iterates through the members of those sets. So it's assigned each of the even numbers first time round, then each of the odd ones in the second time round. So if we actually run that, you can actually see we can go right through the list. We can go through and print out the number set first. This is the initial print. And then the second for loop is going through each of those numbers within that list and printing them out. It does that for both lists because we've got an initial for loop, the outside one, which actually goes through all the contents. So I'm actually going to end this video here. In the next video, I'm going to go through and just show you a few more examples of using lists as the way we've been using them. And we'll actually then introduce you to a mini challenge to finish that off. So I'll see you in the next video.